Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. I'm Morgan McClintock, the CEO of startup marketing agency Firebrand. We've launched this podcast to interview the best in the business, but I'm not going to do it alone. So please meet my co-hosts.
I'm Nicole Pytel, Firebrand's VP of Content Marketing.
And I'm Chris Ulbrich, Firebrand's Head of Media Relations.
I'm Ian Lipner, a tech PR and crisis communications veteran.
We'll drop a new episode each week, so there's plenty of fuel for your marketing fire. Get the spark you need to take your startup to a whole new level. Hello, and welcome to a fresh edition of Fired Up, the startup marketing podcast. My name is Morgan McClintock, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Chris Ulbrich. Hello, Chris. How are you?
Doing great, thanks. Today we're talking about how to get a startup marketing program off the ground. In marketing, we often talk about building on momentum, but when you're just starting out, you don't have momentum. You're at a dead stop. Your marketing program needs a jump start. But frankly, a lot of founders don't know where the jumper cables are or what terminals to connect to. Luckily, our guest today is a specialist in early stage marketing, and he's brought the whole toolkit, cables, generator, and all.
Yes, we're joined by Scott Schwarzhoff, who's an operating partner at Unusual Ventures. So Scott, welcome to Fired Up.
I am fired up. Happy New Year. It's great to be on the show here.
Great to have you. So for those that don't know you, perhaps you could just quickly tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I lead our founder services team here at Unusual. Unusual is an early stage focused venture firm. We've run our third fund. Our whole focus is on helping founders go from zero to product market fit. We're all in as a team on that endeavor with our founders.
Great. And so today we want to talk about that relationship and perhaps just to sort of frame the discussion a little bit from a marketing perspective. How should a startup think about its VC firm and the level of support that they're actually going to get? Because I know that might vary firm by firm.
It does. And just to start on and how to think about venture and the support, probably the easiest way to think about it is by stage of company, right? Mm-hmm. And I say that because if you plot yourself out as a founder on a revenue curve, you have sort of like your early days and you're just trying to figure out who's desperate for what I am solving for, right? And what is the product I need to be building? Then as you move on, to different problems, right? I need to hire my first sales and marketing person, or I need to ramp up and scale my go-to-market team, or now I'm into portfolio and multiple products and all that. And so the venture community is, some firms are purpose-built and other firms are more general purpose. In our case, Unusual Ventures, we are laser focused on, it's you and your co-founder and your dog and a dream.
Yeah.
And you want to get to the top of the mountain there on product market fit, and you're trying to pierce through the gray and figure that out. And so we have a very strong view that is an all-in endeavor. And until you really understand the basics and the foundation for your business, a joint effort between founder and a hands-on venture firm like Unusual is really the ticket to help maximize the chances for success.
It seems like a really important point to zoom in on right from the get-go, which is that not every VC firm comes at this the same way, and different firms will have different levels of involvement in the startup's marketing program. It sounds like Unusual. That's certainly been my experience working with you and your portfolio companies, that Unusual is much more hands-on by design, but that won't necessarily be the case with every VC.
Yes. And I think there are stage-specific issues that need to be addressed. And then there's sort of the specific venture firm's hypothesis around what level of support it should provide. Here, if we focus again on the early stage, think of it as like you're basically going through hypothesis testing. There's a lot of I think, right? I think IT organizations are, suffering from complexity of the cloud. I think that this is the product that we should build to meet that complexity need. I think that, this is the way that we're going to stand out and be unique. And so I think it's a bunch of hypotheses. And in the early days, time and resources are your friend and your enemy, right? You don't have really much of either. And so if you aren't efficient in answering those key questions behind your hypothesis, you end up just blowing through all your cash. And before you know it, you're stuck with a quarter left and you've got a mountain to climb on revenue. And that's a really tough position to be in. And so in our view, I work across lots of portfolio companies and our investment team has experience across lots. We see patterns and those patterns provide the insight and those insights save time and get you to the answers quicker. And so our view is that early on, you really need a lot of hands-on expertise to help the founder who may not have that expertise answer those key questions for their business. But you're right, separately from that, other venture firms have different models, introductions and networks and so forth. They're not bad or wrong, but our view is just that the more primordial need of the business is to answer these key questions so you've set up your entire business for success through Series A and beyond.
So when you say patterns, this is a way for them to shortcut the learning. You've seen this cycle before. They can get there faster. Can you give us an example of what are these kind of patterns? Maybe you've got a whole bunch of playbooks that a seed stage company can access that can get them onto a revenue path sooner.
There are two big ones that come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
One is around who is desperate for what you offer. Typically, we like to talk about it as ideal customer profile or ICP. That's the first and most important question you're trying to answer because a lot of times as founders, you're coming into the perspective, well, I used to be that director of AI at Uber and I know exactly what that person is. And it's like, well, yeah, you worked at Uber. That business has no real relevance to like some other, mainstream customer needs. You're trying to identify the patterns that you see. Who is your desperate user? Who is your desperate buyer? What are their motivations? What are their urgent priorities? And then on the other side, if you have ICP, and as I was just alluding to, it's your message that you're using. And what we like to think of there is your story is split up into like three basic parts: why anything, why now, and why you. And so what you're trying to figure out is you're trying to answer those three questions typically. And you're trying to find patterns, and in particular around why now and why you. And if I had to pick one, I would say most founders struggle the most with urgency and why now, because any company you're reaching out to, chances are your ability as a startup founder to get up high in their priority list is slim to none. And so it's a hand-to-hand combat to elevate that urgency. So you're trying to find patterns on ICP, you're trying to find patterns on your three whys, but ultimately what you're really trying to do on that latter part is find patterns in the urgency and the why now.
Right. These relate directly to marketing, and the definition of the ICP here, often the founders are an example of that ICP, but that might not be in every organization. It might only be in there. And so helping them with that. And then I like this framework of these three questions: why anything, why you, and then why now? And particularly in the current economic environment, like why now? Because do nothing is a risk, but it is the lowest risk, just no decision. So just unpack that last one a little bit. It's sort of super critical. How do you help them answer that why now question?
It's really hard. But
Yeah.
I think the first is just recognizing that it literally is the most desperate question you're trying to answer as a founder. And until you know the answer to it, nothing else in your go-to-market can move or move with the velocity that you're going to need. And I'll give you an example on how we try to unearth that. First, I'll give an example from my past experience, and then I'll sort of codify it. So from my past experience, before Unusual, I was at Okta, ran product marketing through their IPO. And very early on, in the early days, the why anything was that CIOs had to move to the cloud, right? On-prem to cloud, it was a classic sort of like big seismic move. Other big moves are like, zero trust. I'm trying to get the net zero sustainability, like these big sort of C-level initiatives. But within move to cloud, one of the things we realized early on was that people were trying to move to one cloud. And that was, interestingly enough, Office 365. It was one app. It was just one app, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't deploy it because their on-premise software wasn't good enough, and they had to, do all these custom connectors. And Microsoft was taking 2 years to do it. And so we codified this, like, just that one application. And that became the urgent thing. That was the thing that a CIO and their director, their whole team was like, Microsoft has poured billions into moving everyone into this killer application, and we could go from 2 years down to 2 weeks. And that became how we made our first $5-10 million. It was just on that one use case. And that was the urgent, very specific use case. So a lot of times in marketing, you're trying to take the big issue and boil it down into the projects or use cases that you can then hook on to drive the early flywheel. And I think the best way to do that when you're talking with prospects is to basically do an exercise of so what. What you're trying to do is you're trying to ask an open-ended question. So why is moving to the cloud really important? Well, our team needs to get email we have an initial, project to move, email from on-premise to the cloud. Okay, how are you doing that today? Well, and what are the issues you're running into? What is the impact for that? And you're trying to just peel the layers back using questions like so what and measure and getting to impact to really understand basically how this person is almost dead, but we're backing it off a little bit. And that ultimately is your why now.
Now, you're obviously so hooked into the marketing efforts of the companies that you work with. I imagine that in some ways, and again, by design, the line is somewhat blurred between you as a member of the VC team and you as a member of the portfolio company's team. I can tell from the way you're talking about it that you're getting to grips with the portfolio company's individual problems. But, if you're just putting your VC hat on, I'm wondering if you think of yourself sort of as separate from the startups you work with. What do you think makes a good relationship between a VC and a portfolio company's marketing team? What is the VC sort of looking for from the marketing team? And how do you if you're on the startup side, how do you sort of nurture the best relationship with your investor?
So first, there's typically an alignment of goals. Again, and you'll see a pattern here. We've sort of codified the goals. Right? The goals for our founders that we work with are always the same goals for every founder, right? You need 3 things. You need a team of 10 to 15 people. You need a product that uniquely meets a desperate need. And you need traction, right? Generally speaking, around $1 million in revenue, more or less, for an enterprise software company. And so the first thing is that you're looking for this alignment of goals between an investor and the founders, that these are the goals that matter for the organization. And then from those goals, then the question is, well, where are the biggest needs, the biggest blockers to achieve those goals, right? Are we behind on hiring? Do we not know what we should be building? They need clarity. Are we out of product development and now we need to actually start building a product? And so you can sort of break down those bigger goals into sub goals. And then oftentimes, because it's early days, like when I'm involved, I am the marketing department. It's a one-man band. Same thing on our sales side, same thing on our recruiting side. And so the question is just around, well, who's going to do the work? Given that these are the goals, is this going to be the founder that's going to do the work? Are we going to have a contractor? Or are we, as unusual founder services, are we going to do the work in hand with our founders? And then that's just typically a joint planning exercise. Again, because we have good line of sight to the goals, we've been able to flow those goals down into tasks that need to get accomplished by someone either within our organization or within the founding team.
Right. Now, once the startup, you've helped it reach a certain level of maturity and you hand it off to, say, a marketing firm like Firebrand, and now they are taking the lead day to day and helping the startup achieve. Perhaps the startup even hires their own marketing person to work with the agency. And there's the beginnings, the nucleus of a team there. As the VC checking in on or working with companies at that stage, what sort of relationship do you hope to have, and what are the steps that the startup and their team can take to foster a productive ongoing relationship with you as the VC?
A couple points on what you were just talking through there. So number one is the hiring of the first sales leader, hiring of the first marketing leader. Those are typically your first two go-to-market hires. I like to think of that as, we've got the Olympics coming up this year, right? You have Simone Biles. She's coming off of a jump, making her backflip, and then it's all about like sticking the landing. The foot drops back and you're like, oh, everything was great until your foot dropped back and that knocks you down 3 points. That's the executive hire. We have found, oftentimes the hard way, that until you have someone in the seat who owns the function, you run the risk of all this hard work and energy up front going for naught, because there's no one who's like maniacally focused on like, okay, how do I get pipeline and demand gen and like all these things. Step one there after our engagement is hire the backfill. Or as our managing partner likes to frequently mention to me, Scott, you don't get any credit for getting 80% to the moon. And 100% to the moon is when you have someone that owns that. Then after that, you've got someone there that, in our case, we often are involved on the placement of those individuals. Now you have someone that you're trying to equip, and then we'll maintain those relationships. But for the most part, once that's happening, you're sort of around your Series A goals and those gaps. Then now that gap's been filled. And so now it's up to the team to take it on further and get to the next set of challenges.
Right. So I'm interested in that. You've stepped in when they haven't got a marketing person and sometimes a salesperson. And I've seen you talk to the initial prospects and the customers to try and help with that. Why anything? Why you? Why now? Positioning. And maybe we'll come and talk about that a little bit more. The goal is for them to hire that first marketing leader. And there are lots of great marketing people out there, but what do you look for in that? Should the person come from an Okta where it's a later stage, maybe even public company? Or do you look for someone who literally, this is a seed stage company. Maybe we hire someone who's worked at an A or a B, and hasn't seen what the distant future is. What is the decision process there in terms of hiring?
It's always a little tricky, but a couple of things I would point out. I have a personal belief that you need to know what success looks like. You need some yardstick that says, you know what, I know great. I know what great looks like. And the reason for that is you're still really early on, and maybe the founders don't have go-to-market experience. So if you don't know what great looks like, and the founders don't know what great looks like, then how do we know if we're doing a good job or not? You can do that on the job, but the challenge there is then, once again, we're back in the trap of, well, now I'm just losing time and I'm wasting time and energy, and time is our most precious resource. So that doesn't work. I personally look for someone who has been, maybe they haven't been a VP through the experience, but they know how effective management's done. I'll give you a great example. I came from a company that, was doing sort of on-premise proprietary software. And like, we had no idea like what any of our customers were doing with our software. We had to rely on like the customer success team. Once again, I pop into Okta and the first thing I realized is that we had great intelligence on what our customers were doing and the value they were receiving. And, we had regular business value reviews, and we could absolutely understand, and pinpoint that. And we did other things like we had a automatic notification sent from Salesforce out to the entire company when we won or lost a deal. And everyone, instead of using that as a way to bash the poor salesperson who lost a deal, it was a learning moment for the entire company. And so what I learned from what great typically looks like is that usually great is, especially in those early days, is around constant learning. You're constantly learning it goes back to this hypothesis testing. You're constantly learning what works and what doesn't, and those insights are fueling your next step. And so you keep shortening the time to making a decision because you've just have a learning mode, and that needs to be inside the individual's head on like, I'm going to help this organization not only do the things that they need to do marketing wise, but I'm going to help this organization learn.
You're okay about it if they've come from a larger organization. I just heard an interview with Brian Halligan, the founder of HubSpot, and he talked about like climbing up the ice face, and you need someone who's maybe 3 years above, but has done it recently, but not too far ahead of you, so that those lessons kind of resonate. And you would add in, hey, as long as they're sort of hungry and curious and they know what good looks like, they're setting the bar because they're building the function. There's no one else in marketing here, so they have to set the bar.
Yeah, and they need to know what that bar looks like.
Yeah.
And they need to know some of the things, the techniques that have worked, so that you're not wasting time climbing up those bars.
Right, because time is the thing. Now, on the messaging and positioning side, you have a bit of a framework there. I've seen you go through it, because often the founders are like, I think I'm building this with this use case, but actually when you speak to prospects, the real problem is sort of over here. And that's totally natural because these are my maybe technical founders. They've never been through that messaging and positioning exercise. And then you come in at the beginning and sort of, okay, I'm going to help define this. What's your sort of process? I know you talk to a lot of prospects, but how do you sort of drive that messaging positioning so you can get to those three, why anything, why you, why now answers?
And we actually have, before like I get involved with any of our companies, just as a side note, we have this like intake form and sheet that sort of goes through like the basis. And so you're always starting with some sort of straw man view of who is your target and what pains and challenges and solutions you want to have. So there's always like some starting point. And so I think from a process standpoint, what I like to do is first separate the ICP research that you're going for from the messaging side. So we need clarity around the company and the personas. We need to break down the personas into user and to buyer. So just that exercise alone, it helps us to not be general in the problem and general in the solution, right? It's okay, I am going after this IT director and this person's, okay, because it's an IT role, it's an IC role, I know that they're driven by typically around productivity versus say like a CIO that's driven more around value to the organization. Okay, so now that I'm going after this person for that user, now I want to understand the 3 beats of the story for that particular person. And then the why anything, why now, and why you. Typically what I find is that it's easy for a founder to understand the why anything in the general problem space because that's how they were able to found the company. It's not hard to imagine what that general problem is. Where it's hard is on these latter 2 questions like we talked about earlier. And there, in particular, the only way that you get to understanding the urgency part and the desperation is just through these peel the onion questions. And then from there, the easiest question from then is once you understand the why anything, why now, then the why you becomes self-evident. Because in the why now process, you're basically saying, this is the important project that I have. I don't have any ability inside my organization to do it. That creates this gap. And then that gap becomes a set of requirements that you just so happen to fill uniquely. And typically, sometimes companies will help their vendors through a process called an RFP, like a request for proposal. And they'll literally give you the requirements for your solution. And that is a great way of like saying, okay, if you're, they have structured the way that they're defining their needs and they're handing that to you, and you can use that as well in terms of defining sort of where your story goes. But that's what I figure out your ICP first, or separate the ICP into the company and the persona. From the persona, separate that into user and buyer. From the user and buyer, map out your why anything, why now, and why you. And just a little plug for our field guide on our website. That is exactly the process that we use inside of our engagements and that we write a lot about in terms of the content that we produce here at Unusual.
All right. I want to talk about funding announcements. In practice, you don't always have to announce funding. So how do you approach that?
If I just go in a sequence of events here, in this case, we're talking about 2 fundraising rounds, right? So the first fundraising round is your seed check. And so whether it's 2 million or 5 million, or, 10 million, whatever it is, it's a smaller check size relative to your Series A by definition. There is just a fundamental question on like how much PR should we do at that time? Because really what you're trying to do is you're trying to build some sort of traction, get some customers, you're trying to get some other influencers, you're trying to get some other things beyond just the unique founder background. So a lot of times for that fundraising round, unless it's like a really unique founder story, you may not do any PR at all. And instead, the activity is around finding your tribe, your community, and building some initial momentum and getting, maybe it's open source cred that you're, trying to get a certain number of, GitHub stars or Slack users or, some of these other things. You want some existence proofing. And then you want to be able to use that as part of your story. Similarly on customers, similarly on partners, you're trying to like assemble a whole movement. And so then on your Series A, now most of the time we're involved with our venture team as a whole, and the founder are actively involved in the fundraising. But in terms of navigating it, like in our perspective, we have daily interactions with most of our core companies. It's just around like who has the best access. Typically that's ours because we've built up a series of relationships and then working with our media partners. And so the navigation is usually around like, okay, well, what's the story we're trying to, and if you can answer those 3 why questions, you're in a really good spot to then build your press release, right? And then you're also in a really good spot if you've built your tribe and your users and your customers and your partners to then provide proof for the points that you're substantiate in your release, in your story, in your media story. And so you've got all your ducks in a row. It's all about using that seed to Series A to kind of get your ducks in a row so that then when you do go out, you've got something that is bigger than just the technology you built. If it's really meeting, you've got a movement and you're at the front of that movement, and that can be interesting to, any media person.
You mentioned the press release, and this is very tactical, but it's a consideration that I think a lot of our listeners that matters to a lot of our listeners, because we've all had to, write the funding press release, and you will have seen hundreds of them by now. One of the components of any funding press release is the quote from the VC firm. So there's a quote from the CEO, typically. There's a quote from the VC firm. Sometimes it's a quote from a customer if it's a later stage, but at minimum, you have one of each. And it's sort of a running joke among marketing and PR experts that the most basic kind of form of the quote is just an expression of excitement from each party. The CEO expresses excitement for the opportunity and to be working with these great firms, and the VC firm expresses excitement to be working with such a great company and technology. So that's the base level. And everyone sort of groans as they write it, and certainly groans as they read it. What's the best version of that? When you see the best quotes, what are they doing? Is the company playing one role and the VC playing another? And what are those roles in the release?
I mean, ultimately, you're trying to write something that's interesting, but more than that, you're trying to distill all the insight that you've generated over the last 18, 24 months into a statement. So the insight matters. Maybe it's an insight that, like I'm working with a company now in the privacy and compliance space, the GDPR and so forth. And I found it particularly interesting that the insight there is that everyone's running around trying to like figure out, how their organization's, treating privacy data. And And yet at the same time, there's no flashlight. Well, this company, this organization, they're the flashlight into the dark. That's like what they do. And their insight is that the number one thing that you have to do is be a flashlight into the dark of like where your highest risk is. And so that insight, I think, can be codified. And coming back to the statement, I think that the insights and the learnings that you have can be then into interesting statements that, help shed light on like where the ultimate end point is for whatever field you're in.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying that in the release, the VC can play the role of an enthusiastic outsider that is looking at this technology and this company and seeing what makes it special, what raises it above the common run of the competition.
And behind the technology, what was the insight that founding team had on the way that they built their product? Because behind the tech, behind the what, is why did we build it that way? Like coming back to this example of this portfolio company I'm working with, they have this like insights machine where they will serve up, hey, you have an unsigned contract over here. You said you weren't going to share this sensitive information, but I just found it over here. It's insight. It's not what I expected. And so that insight is typically something that is interesting to read, and it helps you express your enthusiasm for the portfolio company through a statement that is rooted in some knowledge gain that a reader would be interested in. I thought everyone in privacy didn't know like what they were doing, with their organization's, private data. And here's an insightful way, an alternative to say like spreadsheets and manual assessments or whatever that I think is interesting. Maybe I should take a look at that. So it's the unexpected insight that I think can be packed into that statement. That's a collection of learnings from the past years that you've been in business.
That's great advice for that first touch when you're working with, publicly coming out, working together with your venture firm. Just sort of finally on this section, what are the final thoughts that you might have on how can a startup work more closely with its VC firm? What's the thing that you wish that they knew that maybe they don't always at the outset?
The venture team is by definition hard-coded to a founder's success. And so underneath everything is a trust. There's a trust level. That trust that your venture partner is acting not only in your best, amongst all the options you have to work with other people outside, is operating with your best intentions, allows you to move through the decisions that you need to make early on faster. It's all about speed to insight and insight to decision. And your venture partner, from seeing patterns of success in the past, can help you accelerate that speed to decision.
That's great. They're always on your side. They've obviously got financial skin in the game. So of all the people that you can turn to, your goals are aligned. And so you fully trust that in that relationship to move the business forward and to help you with those decisions. Our next section is called Smart People, Dumb Questions. And in this section, I literally pick a question out of this bag on my desk. And these are sort of more personal questions. So I'm going to just rummage in the bag here. What's the most unexpected turn your life has taken?
In 2008, I came into my office. I was at a startup, and it was like something Facebook media. I don't know. I think it was all Facebook at the time. Pink slip on the monitor. And that was it. And I looked around and everyone else had their pink slip. And a lot of people had their pink slips in 2008.
Was it a literal pink slip?
Well, it was a pink sticky.
Oh my gosh. It was really a pink slip.
It was just a pink sticky, and it was gather in the conference room, pick up your final check, and that was it. So I was out on my butt, and that was March of that year. Same month, I had my second child. And there's some parallels going on now, but for where we're at on the economy, but totally had to change everything. I actually spent 7 months building an iPhone app because, the iPhone had just come out. I was like, I can go and win my fame and fortune on the App Store. That whole experience there led into the following 5 career changes because of the things I learned when I was building that application, because of the startup I went to that I learned from that application, because of the big company. All of those things were based off of that one little pink slip.
Great. Listen, so from unexpected things, great opportunities can come. And, now maybe we're going through that same phase. What book do you most often recommend?
I have two. Start with Why is my, probably gathered from this conversation. Simon Sinek, Start with Why. I think it is foundational to anyone looking to do great storytelling. So that'd be one. My second one would be Made to Stick, which is a book around how some messages stick in one's mind and others don't. Those two.
If you could learn one skill instantly, what would it be?
I used to play guitar in high school, and I would love to instantly relearn that. My wife is now basically a concert pianist, and I always feel like it'd be great for us to be able to do duos there. So picking up the guitar, something I keep meaning to do, but that would probably be the one.
It's a good one. Our next section is called Fired Up 5, in which we ask our quickfire round. So I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
All right. Rapid fire. Are you ready?
We bet.
I think we may have a hint of the answer to this one. First question is, what would you be doing if you weren't in marketing?
I'd like to teach. That's part of what we do here at Unusual is we help educate, but probably teach business, probably teach startup, all the lessons we just talked through this whole time.
Oh, makes a lot of sense. What is the best career advice you were ever given?
Early on in my career, it was someone mentioned, there's a time to learn and there's a time to earn, and sort of in that order. And I think that one's career is built off of learning experiences early on. The financial gain will come at some point. But I have two kids, college, just graduating now, and I'm hoping that they learn about the next wave, right? I've been riding, just like the rest of us, the internet wave since the mid-90s. We're going to have the AI wave. There's big waves, and you either are surfing the wave or you're getting crushed by it. And so you gotta learn first and about that wave, and then be the surfer and surf down it, and try not to fight it.
What hot trend that is not generative AI have you got your eye on?
Can I say applied generative AI?
Sure.
Look, I would say the vast majority of our investments today are in the AI space. What we're trying to figure out, though, is within AI, what is the 10x difference in productivity for a very specific company? So we have this company in our portfolio called Viscom. Check it out. It's for industrial designers, for cars and for apparel. And one of our top performing companies in our latest portfolio. And when you see the aha moment and you see the eureka moment from a designer at a large apparel or automotive company, it is transformative. And so it is not just general purpose Gen AI. It is Gen AI applied for a very specific use case where the aha moment is really 10x. It's really transformative. And so that's what I would look for. Certainly that's what I tell my own kids to look for, is the application of it for a very specific purpose that's exciting.
Okay. From that last answer, I know the answer to this one, but AI bigger than everyone says it's going to be, or not as big?
I think AI is 10x as impactful as the dawn of the internet. I think that we're still in early innings, and I think that this chapter is going to be the wave that we all ride for the next 20 to 30 years. And so I think it is upon all of us to make sure that it's not AI that's going to take someone's job, but it will be the person who knows about how to harness its impact that will. That's the challenge and the opportunity that we have.
Closing out, what is your biggest goal, either personally or professionally, for 2024?
think we've been through a couple darker years of just market wise. By far and away, the success of our investments and rallying around our founders and getting them to product market fit, helping them to get to the top of that mountain. All of our companies now, it feels like we're getting to some sort of normalcy here, and a lot of the unknowns are known. So I'm excited to help founders get to the top of their mountain and enable the next great technology companies to, shake up the world.
Great mission. Scott Schwarzhoff, the operating partner at Unusual Ventures. Thanks for joining us on Fired Up today. If people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
Sure. You can hit me up on LinkedIn or reach out to me directly at scott@unusual.vc.
Thanks so much for your time today, Scott. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks again.
We'll talk to you soon. Well, that about wraps it up for today. But before we close, we did want to offer all of our Fired Up friends a chance to grab a mega pack of all of our ebooks and guides. That's our guide to content marketing. That's our startup guide to paid media using Google Ads. It's our guide to attribution. You can get all of those, over 100 pages of goodness, at firebrand.marketing/fired up freebies. That's freebies with an S. And we hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, or drop us a note at firebrand.marketing. And as ever, the details of how to get in touch with our guest today can be found in the show notes. Thank you for listening. And until next week, get out there and crush your marketing goals.